So one tricky thing that you need to pay attention to when you're preparing a Premiere timeline for an EDL Preconform export for DaVinci Resolve is you need to pay attention to clips that have transitions on them. In this case, I've got 3 crossfades in this timeline. Depending on how you want this timeline color corrected, you might be able to just get away with exporting the ProRes file with these fades baked into it. Sometimes all you need is just a basic, hey, I just want the saturation and the contrast just to be closer together. Don't do anything fancy, kind of like doing a one light pass. In that case, you can probably get away with just baking those fades straight in, because in Resolve, you can just recreate this fade. And even though the fade is kind of fading into itself, because it's the same file, obviously, you can get away with it. Sometimes that works. However, in most cases, if you want the maximum flexibility for the color grade, you're going to want to supply the colorist with the actual handles that are happening through this transition. Because what will happen, let's say the client says, I want to change the color of these wings to orange or something. Usually in that case, you're going to pull a key or maybe do a roto or a mask or something. And if you're going to try to track that or key that through a transition, it's not going to work. It's just going to fall apart because the pixels are changing through the transition, obviously. So in that case, you actually need to have the clean handles without the transition. That way the colorist can pull keys, they can do tracking, all that kind of stuff, and it won't fall apart during the transition. So in order to do that with a pre-conform workflow, is you actually need to take these clips that have transitions on them, and you want to remove the transitions and then kind of manually expose those handles. And the simplest way to do that is to just copy the clips that have the transitions on them, copy them, and go to the end of the timeline and paste those clips at the end of the timeline. So what's going to happen in the actual file is like you're going to have the original program with all the transitions baked into it. That'll be still part of the exported ProRes file. However, after the last frame of the program, there'll be some black, but then we'll get to this part, and this is where you're going to have those clips up here that have transition. This is where the transitions will be removed and all the handles will be pulled out manually. The reason why you don't want to do that in the main part of the deliverable is that you still want to see the proper editorial context based on your client approval reference. So you don't want to be exposing handles up here. Okay, so as a colorist, you want to see the actual editorial context. All the technical stuff that's required to rebuild this transition should come after the program. So what we'll do here is we'll take these clips and actually make a copy of those clips over each other. And I did that just by selecting it and then option dragging above it. So here what we'll do is we'll use the actual cross dissolve icons here as a guide as to where the handle should start and stop. So the general idea here is you want to manually expose these handles. So the easiest way to do that is to get the playhead, put the playhead at the head of the transition, and then select the edit point on the top clip. And then use the extend edit tool to move the edit point to where the playhead is, which corresponds to the beginning of the transition. And then delete the transition on the top. Okay, so now we pull the handles out for that part of the transition, and we'll do the exact same thing for the other side of the transition. On the bottom clip here, select the edit point, hit extend edit, delete the transition, and there you go. Okay, so now this first clip, we've got all the handles exposed. So just go to each transition and do the same thing. It's best to delete the transition after you do the extend edit, just so you don't confuse yourself. All right, so separate the clips. So now you can see we got the overlap here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is collapse these clips down so they become one clip again. You can see here, based on the time code, that these do match. See? So all you need to do is just select the top clip here and then use Option arrow, at least on my keyboard it's Option arrow, to move that clip down to kind of override itself. And then it becomes one clip again. Okay, so now we have all the handles exposed. So what we can do here is close the gaps here. And the next thing you want to do is remove these through edits here, the little things with the double arrows. And to see those, you want to enable show through edits in the wrench menu. You can go ahead and delete those through edits manually by selecting them and deleting them, which is one way you can do it. But if you have a lot of transitions, that'll be a little tedious. So one thing I would recommend doing is mapping in the keyboard shortcuts preferences and map the command that says join all through edits. And I mapped it to Option J. You can map it to whatever you want, obviously, but join all through edits is the command you want. That command is not available in any of these menus, by the way. So if you're trying to find it in the sub-menu or in a right-click contextual menu, it won't show up. You actually have to map it as a keyboard shortcut in order for it to work. But once you have that keyboard shortcut mapped, you can just run the shortcut, Option J in my case, and all those through edits disappear. So now we have those clips that have the transition on them. So this is why we want to have duplicate frame markers on. Because here you can see where the handles are. Wherever there's not a little colored stripe there is where the handles are. And you can see here, so here's the duplicate frames for this clip. But wherever there's no stripe, that's where your duplicate frames are. So that's a good way to visualize where your handles are. So after you do that, and you've done everything else you need to do in terms of prepping the pre-conform timeline, you can just export this whole sequence as a ProRes 444 file, and then also export the EDL as well. And the EDL will contain these events at the end that I can also use to rebuild the clip transitions up here. So in the end, you're just going to give me one file. It'll be a little bit of black at the end. At the end is all the technical stuff, all the stuff where you've unwrapped transitions. Maybe you've done split screen composites and you've removed the crops and stuff. You dump all that stuff at the end of the timeline here. And then I just rebuild that in Resolve.